All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about all the different ways that things interact with each other. All right, not all of the different ways because we don't have time for that, but some of the different ways. So let's jump into a little bit of review first, just to remind ourselves, habitat versus niche, or niche, however you want to say it. Habitat is the location in which a species lives. That's it. It is the where are they. Where a niche is the role the species plays in that habitat. So yeah, location plays a part, but also, what are they eating while they're in that place? Autotrophs. Oh, do we remember this word? Autotroph? All the way back from chapter 1? Yes, I'm using old information for new knowledge. What kind of teacher am I? Autotrophs are also known as producers. We talked about them last time. Things that make their own food. Auto as in automatic, and troph has to do with food. So automatic food. And then we got heterotrophs. Hetero means different. And then again, troph is food, so have to go out and find different foods to eat. These are your consumers, the eaters. So let's talk about them because autotrophs are pretty basically autotroph plants. They make food, right? Heterotrophs, we have different kinds of heterotrophs. Again, we talked about this in chapter 1 briefly. We have herbivores that only eat plant life. So the autotroph, what we talked about in the food web, autotroph makes the food, and then the herbivores eat the plant, they get the food, they get the energy from the food. And then carnivores eat those animals, so they get the energy from the food that the plant originally got from the sun. So from solar energy into the plant, plant into the herbivore, herbivore into the carnivore, or into the omnivore. That's right, there is another option. Omnivores, us, ladies and gentlemen, are those who eat plants and animals. So we can directly eat the plant and get good nutrients and good energy, or we can eat an animal that ate the plant and get the energy. As shown in this hamburger, this person is getting it from both sources. The meat came from an animal, and the veggies came from plants. Even the bread came from plants, wheat. And there's another thing. This is weird. You go with me on this one. A decomposer is technically a heterotroph, where it is breaking down dead organisms. That kind of sounds like a carnivore, right? We see this animal getting what looks to be eaten alive. Also happens to plants too. That's right. Trees decompose as well. So maybe decomposers are omnivores. Well, here's the difference, guys. When, so go back to this picture, you eat that hamburger, your body is going to pick and choose what it wants to keep. That's right, guys. There's good things in that hamburger and there are bad things in that hamburger, and your body is going to choose what is good and keep the good and use that good for your body, and it's going to leave all the bad behind. And that is when you go to the bathroom and get rid of the bad stuff that you don't want. Decomposers disagree with us. See, they like the bad stuff and they leave behind the good stuff. Unfortunately, we can't eat that good stuff. It's considered inorganic, but plants can. Did we just go full circle? Yes. You see around this body here, it's a bit darker. That is inorganic material, good material that used to be part of this animal. And plants can use it. This is what we call fertilizer. Decomposers leave behind fertilizer for us to use to grow plants in, and then we can eat the plants. Full circle. That's what we call a symbiotic relationship. A relationship where two or more organisms live close together, they work close together, they interact with each other somehow. So those are symbiotic relationships. And we have 3 different types. You may have heard of symbiotic relationships, right? You may have heard it as helping each other out. Both parties get some kind of benefit. They're a good team, not always. What you are describing, what I'm assuming that you are describing, is known as mutualism. It's a kind of symbiotic relationship where both of them get a benefit. For example, bees and flowers have a mutual symbiotic relationship where the bee is going to take pollen from the flower to make, okay, correction, they take nectar. I was writing fast and wasn't thinking. They take nectar from the flower, and the pollen accidentally gets stuck on the bee. So, boom, got some nectar, and the pollen is accidentally stuck on the bee. And then they take that pollen to multiple flowers because they didn't get enough nectar from this one. They're going to go to another flower, land on it, and pollen from the first flower is going to land on the second flower. Now, I know pollen's not blue. I just wanted you to be able to see it. All right. But this second flower now has pollen. And then that pollen, so your bee transfers pollen to the other flowers. And that pollen, I don't know if you're aware of it, contains reproductive material. Sperm, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Plants have sperm and it's in the pollen. And those flowers are now going to get fertilized. It can reproduce. That blue flower and this orange flower are going to have a baby. Aw. They both got some kind of benefit. The bee got some nectar, so it can make honey, which is good for the bees. And the flowers got to reproduce, which is good for the flower community. Both got a benefit. Another kind of symbiotic relationship is called commensalism, a relationship where only one of these organisms gets some kind of benefit, a freeloader, if you will. I take that back because freeloading usually annoys somebody. In this case, the other organism doesn't even know anything's going on, completely unaware. For example, army ants and birds. Also, I know army ants don't actually wear army helmets. It was cute. Go with it. I worked hard on that drawing. All right. So, how are they going to interact with each other? Well, army ants got their name because they like to march in formation in big groups. They look like an army. So, as those army ants march, they scare away insects because, oh my God, this giant army of ants is coming my way, and they fly away right into the open waiting mouths of the birds that they're not paying attention to. That's right, guys. The birds get a free meal. They don't have to go hunting. The bugs are coming to them. So the birds get a benefit out of this. The ants had no idea they did anything. No, they were just going for a walk. They had no idea they were affecting these birds. So they're not harmed. They're not benefited. Nothing happens. They're just there. So the bird gets a benefit, and that's it. That's commensalism. Only one gets the benefit. And then we got parasitism. Parasites. I'm sure you've heard of this. Now, I'm not going to show you any pictures because parasites are disgusting and I want you paying attention. So just listen. There's a relationship where only one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. Example, lice. Head lice. Like they warn you about in school. You don't want to get lice in your hair. So those and humans have a parasitic symbiotic relationship. Like I said, no pictures. You're welcome. But lice feed on human blood. The humans become uncomfortable. The human can get an infection from scratching those bites. That's bad. But the lice get a benefit. The lice got a meal out of the deal, and the humans got hurt. So that is a parasitic relationship. And I don't mean to confuse you with carnivores, hunting, right? Because, yeah, if a lion were to eat me, I'd be pretty hurt too, right? I'd be dead. That's the difference. With a carnivore, the prey dies. With a parasite, the prey survives to suffer. So, yeah, in a parasitic relationship, you are the victim, you get to live, but you are suffering. All right. Now, not everything that interacts with each other is alive. Remember, we're talking about ecosystems. And ecosystems, we have to take into consideration the non-living things as well because they are important. Water is important, but it's not alive. We can't live without it. Oxygen, nitrogen, carbon. That's right, carbon. We can't live without it. Talking about too much carbon in the air, blah, blah, blah. We need it, though, in our bodies. So let's talk about first the water cycle and why it is important. You probably learned about this in elementary school or middle school, so I'm not going to go too far into detail. You probably understand it. It's the movement of water through all of the biotic and the abiotic factors, meaning it's moving through an ecosystem. Water moving through an ecosystem. For example, here we got precipitation, which is a really fancy word for rain, snow, sleet, hail, liquid or water in some form falling from the sky. And then we got runoff, because that water will eventually make its way back to the ocean. That runoff will be rivers, streams, groundwater, just all the water somehow going from the land back to the ocean. I forgot that I left groundwater as its own separate thing. So groundwater, held underground in the soil, can eventually make its way back to the ocean. May not be runoff. Maybe you're drinking it from a well, and then you go to the bathroom, and eventually that water does go back to the ocean. It will return to the ocean. All right. There we go. There's my arrow. So precipitation to runoff and groundwater back into the ocean. And then we're not done, because it's in the ocean, but how does it get in the sky in the first place? A process you probably know called evaporation. It gets hot. Little physics for you. The water molecules now gaining energy from the heat, and that energy is making the molecules move all around, and they're separating away from each other to getting less dense, and eventually that less dense water gets too less dense. Is that a term? Separates and becomes a gas. That's evaporation. And it just rises up into the sky. When it's up there, where it's nice and cool, and therefore loses energy, and the molecules come back together, it becomes liquid again, and will eventually drop back down in the form of rain. There we go, guys. Low water cycle. Somewhere along this way, living things were drinking that water. Humans were drinking this water, go to the bathroom, and it rejoins the groundwater. Fish out here are drinking the water. They go to the bathroom, it rejoins the ocean, and the cycle continues. Well, let's talk about one that you probably have not heard too much about in middle school or elementary school, the oxygen cycle. Movement of oxygen through the biotic and abiotic factors. Remember, biotic and abiotic, that's just a fancy way of saying the ecosystem. Movement of oxygen through your ecosystems. First thing's going to happen is animals will breathe the oxygen, like this cow, or you, or me. We are breathing oxygen that the trees release into our bodies. Or down here, algae releases into the water. That's right, guys. Fish want the oxygen. They're not breathing water. They're breathing the oxygen that's in the water through their gills. And then we exhale, or fish, what we call it an exhale, a release, carbon dioxide back into the environment, where it's going to get picked back up by whatever made the oxygen in the first place. For us, it's the trees. For the fish, it's the algae. We're sharing. And over here, that's more of the carbon cycle, but we'll come back to that. We exhaled carbon dioxide. Fire does the same thing. It burns things that has carbon in it, and carbon dioxide goes into the air. The trees breathe carbon dioxide, and it supplies oxygen for the fire again, because fire needs oxygen. So oxygen cycle and the carbon cycle are pretty close. Like I said, the plants will breathe and absorb. I don't know what term to use for intake. The plants will intake the oxygen, or carbon dioxide, and it will release the oxygen again. Oh, and the sun can also release oxygen from the water in the atmosphere. If it gets hot enough, they can separate and then rain back down. It's a thing. Either way, it's coming and going, and it supplies it all around the ecosystem. So I mentioned the carbon cycle. What is that? That is the fact that there's carbon in all things. All living things are made of carbon. We are referred to as carbon-based life forms. It's a necessary molecule. Atom, carbon's an atom. I know science. And that atmosphere is full of carbon, especially these days, because we keep pumping it out from our cars and factories and things like that, and fires. So here's what's going to happen. Photosynthesis. Plants are going to turn the carbon from the atmosphere into carbohydrates, sugars. What are we talking about, guys? The plants breathe carbon dioxide. That is 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. Plants are breathing in carbon because They want the carbon to make a carbohydrate, sugar. We talked about that in a previous chapter, in the photosynthesis chapter. Rain is also going to carry carbon dioxide into the water, which plants will be absorbing. Humans, animals, other living creatures are going to eat the plants and drink the water, and we are going to get the carbon into our bodies. So now we have the carbon, which we don't all want in everything. We don't want it in our air. So we will, exhale that in carbon dioxide, but we're going to use the carbon in other places, helping with our sugars and things. And then cellular respiration is what we call that, using the carbohydrates. We get the energy out of the carbohydrate, and what we're left with is the carbon, and we don't want it anymore. We just wanted the energy. So we're going to put it back into the air by exhaling. All stuff that we've talked about this year. And we just went through a whole cycle. The cows here are exhaling carbon dioxide. The plants will inhale or intake the carbon dioxide. The cows will eat the plants and get the carbon back, so on and so forth, over and over again. But here's another thing: volcanic activity also releases carbon into the atmosphere when they erupt. Factories also release carbon into the air. So at this point, we're now putting more carbon in than these cows or plants are able to take out. So that's bad. The cycle is getting disrupted. We want to do something about all of this. Maybe you guys will be smart enough to figure out a solution. All right, and the nitrogen cycle, which is kind of tough. Long story short, plants need nitrogen in the ground. That's the long story short. Plants need nitrogen in the ground. So it's a cycle of how that's going to happen. Animals need nitrogen to make amino acids for proteins. We eat the plants to get that, right? So there is a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, but we can't breathe it in, right? There's so much nitrogen in the air, but we can't do anything with it. Our lungs are like, nah. So instead, we got to get it from those plants. How are the plants going to get it out of the air? Because they don't have the ability either. They're just breathing in the carbon dioxide. We have a certain kind of bacteria called nitrogen fixers that are living in the ground. So they're going to take nitrogen from the air. They're fine with it. They're good. And then they are going to go to the bathroom. That's right. Bacteria does that. And instead of pee, they're releasing ammonia, which has the nitrogen in it. There it is. Okay, cool. So now we got nitrogen from the air into the bacteria, which got peed out of the bacteria as ammonia. And then, another bacteria is going to drink it. Ugh. That's a weird combo there, multiple types of bacteria. It's going to turn that ammonia into nitrates. They'll drink the ammonia and they'll go to the bathroom to release the nitrogen in a form called nitrates. Plants will use the nitrates. Right? It'll come up in their roots with the water that they drink, and the plants will have nitrates inside of them. And then they'll use, did I skip anything? I did not, okay. Nitrates will be used to make amino acids and proteins, and then animals will eat the plants and they'll get the amino acids. So it's, again, a cycle. So again, long story short before we finish it, nitrogen in the air, bacteria breathes the nitrogen, pees out ammonia. A different bacteria drinks the ammonia and poops out nitrates. Gross. Plants take in the nitrates, use it to make amino acids, which we talked about this year. We'll eat the plants and get the amino acids for our proteins. And then we have the nitrates, we have the nitrogen inside of us, right? It's a cycle. It needs to go back into the air. Decomposers will break us down, like bacteria and fungi. And all that nitrogen will go back into the soil or back into the air and start all over again. Problem solved. And then, gentrification is a fancy word for what I just said. Bacteria puts it all back up into the air. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the interactions that we're going to be talking about this chapter. We still have one more set of notes where we're going to be talking about the ways different animals interact with each other to regulate each other's populations, meaning trying not to let anyone become overpopulated. Kind of an important thing. So stay tuned for that. Have a nice day, and I will see you next time.